Born in 1996 in Oklahoma to pharmacist and a school teacher, Gregory Dimitri moved quite often through his childhood. When he was 9, his family settled outside Chesapeake, Virginia. He was an athlete participating in football and wrestling, had a steady job and solid grades. He worked in a lumber yard during off seasons, was recruited by West Point Academy and attended, was heavily influenced by the strong work ethic instilled by his father. He found it displayed in his time with football and the military. He accredits his sense of perseverance and hard work from his parents. We will now hear his story. Why did they join the military, and what did they see as the benefits and risks of this service? In his interview, he discusses that when you are appointed into the military academy, you are obligated to serve 5 years. West Point is a military academy. He did not go there for, quote, noble service or serving his nations, but he says that it was simply to prove that he could play football and succeed in D1. West Point provided this opportunity. He got to serve with some fellow teammates and students from West Point when he was in the military. He speaks highly of the type of bond that occurs in the military and found this as a major benefit that the university showed him. His friend Will specifically joined him throughout all walks of this service. When he specifically speaks on why he chose to serve and how he chose his branch, he explains this.
So now, for those of us who didn't go to West Point, I understand that you had the 5 years worth of service, that commitment that you made.
Right.
Did you have to choose a particular branch? And if not, what led to you choosing the branch that you chose?
Well, for the United States Military Academy, our default branch is the Army. So you go into the Army. You can apply to go into another one by exception, but those numbers are very small. It's a primary commissioning source for the Army.
What was their training like, and did they receive specialized training? He says that he initially began serving in Oklahoma and Fort Sill, and West Point was vastly different from anything that he had experienced there or in future military training. You come in as a second lieutenant, quote, ready to serve, and you go through your basic training course for specific military branches. He was a field artillery lieutenant and learned about the specifics of his trade. He felt that school and the Army had different purposes. The course from school simply gave him the technical tools for his military profession.
Brief of what that life changed on day one for the first 6 months. But if you did school that first 6 months, and give us that first 12 months. So give us that time right after school.
So, school is, again, kind of I don't want to say it's not the Army, but it's not what the Army is designed for. It's part of, it's the educational basis that supports the Army as a profession, but it's not the purpose of the Army. The purpose of the Army are the units that support the defense of our nation. And so that's what the basic course gave us the technical tools to go out and do our profession. And so, 6 months after you graduate from college, you complete that course, and then you go sign into your unit.
What was their service like? What were their jobs, and what types of things did they see or do while in service? Did they participate in war, and what was that like? He states that he initially began serving in Oklahoma and Fort Sill. His first overseas deployment was Operation Desert Storm. He graduated from West Point in May of 1990 and signed in February of that same year. From there, they saw the deserts of Saudi Arabia by October. He did participate in war, and his first deployment was 6 months. From there, they grew longer, is what he found. The first 2 deployments were 6 months, then a year, followed by a 15-month deployment, which he would not be able to finish due to a severe wound. He first served in the Persian Gulf War. The United States had historically been supplying supplies and aid to Iraq, a country in direct opposition to Saudi Arabia. The fall of Saudi Arabia would mean major benefits for the oil industry in Iraq. The United States, in order to attempt to combat the fall of Saudi Arabia, began to deploy both troops and supplies. After perceived aggression from Saddam Hussein, the United States created a coalition with a medley of other countries, including Saudi Arabia, Syria, Egypt, and NATO allies. In the January of 1991, Operation Desert Storm occurred, and so the expulsion of Iraqi forces from Kuwait ensued. Operation Desert Storm was one of the largest air campaigns that the United States has ever conducted, and once on land, the event lasted for 100 hours, and upwards of 700,000 American troops were involved. The next war he served in was the Afghan War. The war-torn country of Afghanistan had been in constant conflict since the late 1970s. With the withdrawal of the Soviet Union's influence following the fall of the Soviet Union, the Taliban began their rise to power in this nation. With the rise of the Taliban came the rise of terrorist attacks. Following the terrorist attacks of September 11th, the United States continued its pursuit and the capture of Islamist extremists. On the hunt for Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, the United States demanded that the Taliban surrender him. When this demand was not met, they found resistance rather than compliance, the United States, alongside their allies, began their mission. Training camps and military sites ran by al-Qaeda and the Taliban were targeted. This continued for 2 months as the collection of foreign forces in Afghanistan attempted to push out the Taliban, which they eventually did, and the Taliban dissolved from there into Pakistan. The next and most influential war that he was probably a part of, influential to him that is the Iraq War. In March of 2003, the United States invaded Iraq with under the understanding by George Bush that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction that were both biological and nuclear. They successfully dismantled the authoritarian government that Hussein had put in place, but created a brutal civil war that ensued for the years to come between Shiite and Sunni Arabs and their Kurdish neighbors. The democratic governments put in place by the United States military were deemed unsuccessful as it continued to put oppressive people into power. In 2007, the United States increased their military presence in Iraq to help maintain violence in Baghdad and other regions. Despite the capture of Osama bin Laden, the war has yet to conclude.
And then that's when my vehicle was hit. The blast lifted my vehicle off the ground and ejected me out on the road. And I remember hitting the ground and coming to a rolling stop on my back, and just kind of a little bit into disbelief, but really angry and pissed off, because I'm like, pardon my French, but I'm like, we're out here. I'm out here trying to do the right thing by these people. These fuckers are trying to kill me. I mean, it just fucking pissed me off. And then I realized that something was wrong with me, and I knew it was serious. And I remember saying, God, I don't want to die in this country. And then I lost consciousness.
How did military service impact their views of people in the world? Well, on May 7th, 2007, the event that he was speaking about ensued, and that is a major view that impacted him. That is a major event that shaped his perception of the world and of foreign aggression. On that day, he had his typical 1 or 2 engagements with Iraqi leaders, and there was a soldier memorial service that was going to happen later that day. Remembering hearing intel that there were some attacks on the path they were taking to the Falcon, this was not unheard of. There was attacks quite frequently. They got to the memorial without any disruptions, though. It was the first time that everyone had convened since they had left Fort Riley. On his way back from this service, his vehicle was hit and he was expelled from the vehicle. He describes feelings of both disbelief and absolute anger, and then he blacked out. The individuals he was with did not notice he was gone, and when they eventually found him, he was 100 meters away. He was resuscitated, and the medics put tourniquets on his legs. They took him to the troop medical clinic, and he was unsure if he was going to make it back. When he woke up, he was in Washington at the Walter Reed Medical Center. He traveled back with his friend. When his family finally heard about what happened, she She, being his wife, was approached at the gym, and the brigade commander's wife came up to her and brought her to the commander. They told her that he was wounded, but at the time she did not know how bad the injuries were. She knew that his legs were harmed, but she did not think that it was life-threatening. In reality, it was. So, other ways that he mentioned that these injuries and this experience affected him is that he said that to have these significant injuries and to believe still that you can do this on your own, he felt was irrational. He sympathizes with other veterans who are in his position and who are harmed or have been harmed by war, but he feels that the mental health professionals that he had to seek out were necessary. He came back in a mental state that he was not expecting. He encourages for them to reach out to the communities and resources that the military makes available. He understands that it's not natural to want to ask for help, but you need to recognize that you cannot do it alone. He explains from there the vastness of the military's helpfulness.
You know, I said, you name an organization in this country that you can give any problem to anywhere in the world, and the military will figure it out. Whether it's the helping clean up the Fukushima nuclear disaster, or Ebola in Africa, or fighting counterinsurgencies all over the world. I mean, what organization has that breadth of spectrum to be able to handle those kind of problems? Hurricane Andrew in Florida. I mean, we can take on any problem, and we do.
What was it like coming back to the U.S. or coming back to civilian life? He says that coming back to civilian life was largely surrounded, a lot of the decisions surrounded his injury. He chose to be in Virginia after staying wounded, and he did a lot of community outreach to make this area feel like home to him and to build roots in a community. He feels as though that this helped him a lot.
So now, how was that transition into civilian life, taken into family, community, a wounded soldier? How was that transition? How did family and community receive it?
Well, one of the decisions that my wife and I made early on was that we wanted to stay in this area, the Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area, for a number of reasons. I think the first was really the medical facilities that I knew that I was going to need to access because of my injuries, but also because of the opportunities. My wife had been a teacher when we were stationed here earlier, had been a teacher in Fairfax County, and we liked the schools. It just was a good fit for our family. So we made that decision pretty quickly after I was wounded that we wanted to stay here.
After service, how did it impact their lives? Did it lead to various jobs and careers? How did it impact their family life, and etc.?
I was wounded that we wanted to stay here, and so and then as things would progress, my last job as the garrison commander of Fort Belvoir really allowed me to interact with my community in a way that most jobs don't. And so I built a house in the community before I retired, and I really sunk my roots in. And so that transition was very, honestly, very seamless for me because, you know, one day I was, you know, driving to work on Fort Belvoir, and the next I wasn't, and I was still in the same house and still in the same community.
All right.
From here, he discusses how West Point Academy led him to connections that led him to being both the Vail Veterans Program ambassador and having connections with the NFL. Clearly, the military has impacted this man both positively and negatively. He's experienced hardships that he never would have experienced because of the military, but also amazing opportunities that are very unique to West Point Academy and the military service he went through. He's a very valuable member to the veteran community and does what he can to be a good community outreach member and ambassador for this organization.